welcome back again. Do you collect anything, or do you know anyone that is a collector of anything? Do you know what I used to collect when I was about your age and a little older? Can you look here and guess? If you guess frogs, that's a good guess, because I used to really like frogs for some reason. I still do. But I suppose I like them because they have big eyes like a cartoon character, and they're just fun creatures. So I used to have a lot of frogs, and I gave most of them away to other friends that collected frogs, but there's still some scattered around the house, and Maxie's been going around picking them up so that we could look at a few frogs today. Here's a frog that, a puppet actually, that we made for the state fair. And for many years we performed a show called Peter Rabbit, and this guy was Jeremy Fisher. I don't know if you've read the Peter Rabbit story, but Jeremy Fisher was a big character. He was a frog. Here's a frog that was let's say, doorstop, and it's very heavy. I don't know how Maxie got this in here, but he must be a very strong mouse. These frogs over here, this one is named Ribbit, and he was a frog on a television show we did called Swamp Critters of Lost Lagoon, and this was the stuffed animal version of him that was sold in stores, and here was a puppet version of him. So why are we talking about frogs today? Well, a good reason is because we're going to have another guest narrator, a guest storyteller. His name is Fletcher Frog. He's a good friend, and he's going to tell us a story from the book of Acts. Another really good story. Let's see what Fletcher has to say.
Howdy there. My name is Fletcher Frog. My favorite things are fishing and hopping around and telling stories. The Bible has lots of pretty wild stories, and a lot of them are in that good old book of Acts. My friend Kiki Bird likes that book too. She told us about people all over Jerusalem talking about seeing Peter and John heal a man in the name of Jesus. Woo. Everybody was shouting that story like frogs in a pond in the springtime. They couldn't stop croaking about the amazing things that were being done by Peter and John. And of course, other followers who had known Jesus personally were always there telling their stories. We can be sure that Thomas was talking about the time he had seen Jesus in that upper room after the resurrection. Mary Magdalene would also have been sharing her own story, how Jesus had changed her life. He had cured her of a very bad illness. And she was the first one to see him alive on that first Easter morning. And well, you know Peter, he kept spreading the word about God's love for all people, even though he had been told to stop. You remember those temple leaders? They didn't want to lose their power over the people. Those guys were like big frogs in that little pond called Jerusalem. They argued about what should be done about Peter and the others. They just didn't want to hear stuff about everybody being loved equally by God. Can you imagine? But a wise Pharisee named Gamaliel said, "What if the word they are preaching is the truth? To fight them would be fighting against God." They wouldn't listen. They didn't want to even hear about the truth. They were afraid of change, afraid they would lose their power as religious leaders. I can't imagine. So many of the followers of Jesus had to start meeting in secret, in places where the temple leaders couldn't find them, and throw them in jail. Brave disciples like John and Peter had been put in jail more than once, and they knew better than anyone how dangerous it was to even talk about Jesus' teachings. They were in great danger when they spoke the good news about Jesus in public. I can't imagine. Can you? Once a brave and great teacher named Stephen preached a long sermon about Jesus being the Christ who had been sent by God. The temple leaders grabbed Stephen and had him hauled away for good. But Stephen had inspired more people to continue spreading the word that everyone was a child of God. And they were very brave women and men. They were going to spread the news one way or the other. You know, one of the main reasons I like those folks is a lot of them were fishers just like me. They must have remembered the times Jesus had worked his miracles and helped them catch so many fish all the time. So they made up a secret symbol of two arches that looked like fish. When they talked to strangers, they would draw one arch with a stick in the dirt. If the strangers knew what it meant and drew the other arch, the followers of Jesus knew it was safe to talk about him. And the Greek letters that stood for Jesus' title of honor, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, were the same letters that spelled the Greek word for fish. I just love a good fish story, and I wish this story could end right here. But the work had just begun for those loyal friends of Jesus. You see, there was a young guy in those days named Saul of Tarsus. Tarsus, that's a funny name, isn't it? He had guarded the coats of the men who had carried Stephen away and was not even close to believing all those stories about Jesus. As he grew older, Saul became even meaner. He said those crazy followers of Jesus just had to be stopped. He traveled with soldiers from town to town, finding Jesus followers and having them arrested and thrown in jail. But they weren't going to be stopped. They just kept traveling around, drawing their fish in the dirt, and old Saul just kept chasing them. Crazy times, crazy times. But that's all the time I have for stories right now. I'm late for a fishing trip of my own. Glad we could all talk. Let's do it again soon. Y'all come back now. You hear?
Hey, Maxie. How are you today? Good? That's good. Hey, I understand that Fletcher is really a fine Southern gentleman, isn't he? I knew it. So, guess what? We are doing some new coloring sheets, and we've got one of Fletcher today, I think. And did you have it? You have it there? Oh, look at that. Oh, here's Fletcher Frog. Everyone gets a Fletcher Frog now. Brand new. That's exciting. You like that? I hear there's going to be a really handsome one of you later on. Are you excited about that? Very handsome mouse? Are you the handsome mouse? Are you? Yes, you are. Yes, you are. I could go on, couldn't I? Okay, so now, you know what we're going to do? I understand that Daffy is out in the garden and she has had some trouble with some kind of clingy friend or something like that. I'm not sure. You want to go check on Daffy? Okay, well, let's go.
Say, I used to think this was pretty, but it's really a Carolina coral bead. It's invasive. It looks kind of like a vine, but it's just invasive. It competes with other plants.
Well, it looks like Daffy's going to be clearing her garden for a while, isn't she? Yep.
As you can see, this invasive friend of mine has decided it is going to be friends with me. It's still invasive, but ever have one of those clingy friends?
And speaking of gardening, looks like Luke, Rachel, and Jude are busy in their garden, and they're making a thing called a dream catcher. You ever made a dream catcher before? Well, let's see how they're making theirs. You ready? Okay.
Here's one that a friend in high school gave me years ago. It's a cool little frog. And here's one that's a big TV star. You ever hear of this character? He was a puppet. Do you know what a puppet is? Well, we'll talk about that some other time. But meanwhile, it's time to say goodbye to our friends today. So go in peace. I'm glad you had a good time today, or I hope you did. See you next time.